I'm a sucker for good deals and cheap thrills, so when this 1972 Honda CL350 popped up on Facebook Marketplace, I did the only thing a reasonable person would do and buy an over 50-year-old abused and non-running dual sport to try and restore it. The goals for this bike were simple: get it running and get it back on the road. Now let's go back in time 3 months earlier when I first started working on it. I've already done the boring bit and put a brand new battery underneath the seat here, so we're starting off fresh. Now we can go ahead and see what else we need to do to get this running well. Alright, with our brand new battery, we should be able to turn the key and see the headlight turn on. And now I did turn the fuel on, choke is on, so might as well turn on the easy button. So that's a very promising sign for this motorcycle. We have spark, and we have some fuel coming in, but the carburetors are not very happy. So let's go ahead, tear them out, give them a good clean, and tune them up. Now, I think I'm going to go ahead and start by removing this air box here. That'll give us some space to work on the carburetors, and also give us an opportunity to check the air filter, make sure there's one in there, and we're not sucking up any rat nests. So this is already loose, which I feel like it shouldn't be. And why is this loose? What is the trick to this? Alright, turns out the trick is to take off the nut on the other side. So now this should come off. Oh God. There we go. Just had the thing in the wrong spot. Oh no, I have to struggle with the throttle cable. So let's take that tank off. And now we have good access to our throttle cables to remove them. And we can actually see that this throttle cable is missing its little screw on the end. So we're gonna have to fix that. Now we can attack our throttle cable 1/8 turn at a time and slowly work its way out. Now with everything unhooked, we can pull the carburetor off and bring it to the table. Alright, we have one carburetor on the table here, and for demonstration purposes, I think I'm just going to have the one carburetor, and it's going to be very much the same on the other. First, we're going to use GIS screwdrivers. This is one I picked up off Amazon. Works pretty well. As to not destroy these small screws. And we can see this one is already pretty well mangled up. So honestly, I should probably just get new hardware for this. Otherwise, we're going to start with the CV side first, and then take off the bowl and remove all the jets. And let's stop talking and get started. If you'd like to watch more videos of my brother and I working on old cars and bikes, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any new uploads. Taking off the top of the carburetor exposes the CV boot and spring assembly. The boot doesn't have any rips or cracks, so we'll be reusing it. We should have a needle attached to this, which is kind of a problem. It should be pointing out the bottom here. Oh, and there's our needle. So this was also not doing anything. Next, we can just take off the bowl, and making a mess is optional. Next, we can just pop off the two jets, which are retained by a little metal clip. Rubber plug, which is also very important to have. We can remove the float. And our float needle looks to be in decent condition. It doesn't have a whole lot of wear on it. Little float seat. Now we can get these little jets out. So something interesting that's different on these carbs versus all the other ones I've worked on previously is that these two jets here are actually pressed into the carburetor body. It does look like there's a spot for a screwdriver, but that is fake news. Don't believe it. You just have to press it out. And we can press it out through the top here, and that should be using something like a chopstick or something like that. Alright, I actually just ended up using the tip of this golf tee to just get them started, and then they just both popped right out. The pilot jet does take a small screwdriver to get out, and with some gentle persuasion, it pops right out. There we go. Popped right out. And if I go ahead and hold this to the light, I can see that this thing is actually clogged. So, good thing we got it out, and we're going to clean it. Last thing we're going to remove is going to be this idle air screw. And I'm actually going to write down how many turns it's out, so that way I have a baseline for this carburetor and the other one, and we can compare that to what the factory service manual says, like 1.25 turns. So we'll keep that, write that down, and that way we know where to put it back when we take it out. Okay. And inside of here, which is often forgotten about, is a little washer and O-ring, and those also have to come out. And there's our washer and O-ring. So now it's ready for a bath, and same thing with all the other small parts. Alright, new carburetor kit has come in, and so we're going to go ahead and start rebuilding one of the carburetors. I'm going to do one on camera, and it's just going to be the same thing for the other one. So let's get started. A touch of oil so it goes in smoothly. There we go. That is nicely in there. Now let's put in our idle control. Go. Spring. Washer. O-ring. I'm going to go in until it lightly bottoms out, and then back it off, say 1.25 turns. Now let's go ahead and put in our new idle. And we actually have two jets in this kit, a 35 and a 38. I'm going to guess because of we're so close to sea level and our new exhaust, I'm going to go ahead and put in a 38 in here because our exhaust might be a little more free-flowing than the old one. And then we're going to have to press those in gently, and then we can put in everything else. Just going to use my wooden golf tee here, press them in. Next step, we have our float seat and our float assembly to go in. And we will measure the float height a little bit later. Now, this little plug goes here around everything. Press these in, and I have fancy new hardware for all of that. Our spring, and our cover is on with our slide in place, and we should have a carburetor that works more or less. Now that we have a freshly rebuilt and clean carburetor, we can go ahead and reverse our steps before and install these. And with both carburetors in, we can verify that our throttles are moving at the same time. Now we just slap on the airbox, put on the fuel tank, then connect up the carburetors, fill it up with gas, and hope it doesn't leak everywhere. Alright, choke is on. We have the key in the ignition. Let's see if anything happens. Alright, we might have to adjust the idle a little bit, but that is much better than before. Alright, let's go ahead and raise up the idle, and then we'll mess around with some of the fine tuning. Alright, I've spent some time messing around with the adjustments on the carburetors, trying to get the idle correct, and also the balance between the two carburetors sorted out. So I've got it to this point, where if I turn the key, put the choke on, and then try and start it, now if you let it warm up a little bit, try and warm it up, try and take the choke off, then it dies, which is less than ideal. Also, it does seem to hit about a wall when around 3,000 RPM. which isn't great. And I think that is because I put in the jets that were the larger ones, and it's just kind of flooding out the engine at 3,000 RPM, and it just hits a wall. So I'm gonna go ahead, redo everything I just did, but put in the smaller jets, and then we're going to retest it and see if it got any better. Alright, it's been a couple days, and I've been kind of messing around with the tuning on these carburetors. I went ahead and dropped down the jet sizes, readjusted the floats a couple times, and now we got it running pretty well. But you won't hear it because while checking the tuning with the spark plugs, I managed to mess up the threads for one of the spark plug holes, which is very unfortunate because I have done spark plugs a million times and on cars where spark plugs are impossible to reach. But that's not too big of a deal because we can save it with this helicoil. This is the helicoil kit I'm going to use. We have an M14 by 1.25 thread that we're going to be trying to save. And to keep metal shavings from going inside of the cylinder, I'm going to go ahead and coat this tap with a bunch of grease. So that should do a pretty decent job of keeping everything out of the engine. And I've already set the engine piston all the way down, and so all the valves are closed, so they're not going to get in the way. Let's go ahead and start trying to save this hole. Ideally, I would do this with the cylinder head off, but I didn't feel like taking off the cylinder head, so we're doing it this way. I applied a generous amount of grease to the tap and started the process of trying to save the threads. Once the tap is threaded in, it makes quick work of the aluminum cylinder head. I periodically remove the tap to clear out the shavings from it and to apply new grease. You can see the grease is doing its job, keeping everything out of the engine. Alright, I've gone ahead and cleaned up the work area a little bit, and now I've also gone and cleaned up the caught filings with this little pick around the edges, so we should be pretty good. Next step here is to choose to take our new threads, and we're going to apply some sealant as per the instructions. So I'm going to go ahead and use this copper ultra gasket maker and apply it to the threads, and then we're going to start putting it into the hole. And to ensure that we actually have a pretty decent sealing surface, we're going to spray this with brake clean, and then blast everything out with the compressed air. A healthy dose of copper gasket maker gets spread around the threads. Now we're going to insert the threaded part into the new hole with the knurled end facing up. And we're going to thread it down until it's flush. We are flush. Last step here is to use our punch here to set the knurling in place. So I'm going to go ahead and smack it a couple times, and then we're going to let this sit for overnight. I think we're good. Now just let the sealant cure, and then we should be ready to test out if our fix actually worked or we need to buy a new cylinder head. Alright, it has been over 24 hours. Let's go ahead and put in our new spark plug, which threads in nicely, and we can go ahead and try and see if this actually works. Alright, and just for fun, we're going to kick it over. Works okay. Cool. Alright, so the next thing we're going to tackle is the suspension. In a couple minutes, I rode it around the yard. The rear springs and struts are not doing so hot, so I'm going to go ahead and swap them out, and then we're going to address the fork seals. Rear suspension is super easy to service. Just blast off the nut at the top along with the bolt at the bottom, remove the crusty rear shock, and then install the shiny new one. And of course, assembly is just a reverse of disassembly. The other side is the exact same process, just with one extra bolt for the grab handle, and we have to work around the exhaust. Otherwise, we just rinse and repeat the same process as the previous side. With the rear done, we can go ahead and get the bike up on the stands so we can start on the front forks. And we give the front wheel a spin for good luck. To remove the front wheel, we just have to remove this cable, and it was already loose. And we just remove this baby cotter pin. Oh god, the light fell. And this should pop out. Just like that. Not a 14. And now to get rid of the speedometer cable. The axle is up next, and it's only held on by 4 nuts. And then once that's free, we can go ahead and take off the wheel. Next, we just blast off the 4 bolts holding on the front fender. Now just remove the top and bottom pinch bolts. And with the pinch bolts removed, the forks should just slide right out. But I had a hell of a time trying to get mine out, and resorted to beating them out with an extension and a hammer. Oh, well, we can see that this has extended, so it's doing something. And it just takes a lot more of a beating than I would have expected. This is extremely rusty. Oh no. Forks got hit with the wire wheel to fight off the scaly rust, but there's not a lot I can do about the pitting in the metal. Well, this is what we're working with, and you can see it is extremely pitted. So that is why it refused to come out. Now, I'm pretty curious to see if we undo this bolt, the drain bolt, if anything will come out. We have water coming out. We have a mix of water and oil, but not a whole lot of oil. Try and get a little bit of heat in here to hopefully loosen it up a little bit. Alright, I've air fried this a little bit. Let's see if it helped out any. There we go. I was worried I was gonna have to bust out the air impact. But I already turned the compressor on, so I might as well use it for something. And I was able to just gently pry out this old seal with the help of the heat gun. Helped loosen it up a little bit. So, time to clean everything up, put a new seal in. Alright, so for the new fork seals, I have this leak-proof seal, which allegedly is better than the original Honda seal. So we're going to put that to a test. The directions are pretty easy to follow, and they even included pictures for people like me that can't read. Okay, so allegedly, this Allen bolt should have some blue Loctite on it, so I'm going to put a small amount. Oh gosh, I think that was too much. Alright, it doesn't need a whole lot. And crank it down. Alright, now it's just time to fill it up with oil, and we're going to do all the same steps on the other side, so I will see you when everything is on the bike. New dust boots get slid onto the forks before they enter their final resting place, and they're much easier to slide into place with the rust removed. Alright, I have the forks installed onto the bike, and for some reason, these tops don't want to come out, and I think that's because I hammered everything into place to get this out. So I'm just going to try and get my 200 milliliters or so of ATF in here carefully without spilling everything. So let's see if I can do that. Only ended up spilling a little bit on each side, not a whole lot. So with the ATF in its place, we can go ahead and put all the bolts back. After putting in the bolts, we can just go ahead and torque them to spec, which is Guten tight. And just like that, the front wheel is where it belongs. And I thought we were ready to take this out on a proper rip, but the ignition system had other things to say about that. So in the meantime, while I waited for parts, I decided to clean up the gas tank because it was pretty ugly. Filled it with distilled vinegar for about 48 hours, which happened to be around the same amount of time as it took for parts to come in. That must have been the perfect amount of time because we ended up with a gas tank that was super clean. And don't worry, that's not vinegar, that's fresh gas. Now to tackle the ignition system. We can see here that the bike refuses to start, and the points were in a sorry state and refused to open correctly. At the same time, the condenser also went bad, so they got replaced as a package deal. I installed the new points and went ahead and set the timing. This was pretty straightforward and easy to do with a test light. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and install one last part to be road legal. And then disaster struck again. So I took this out on a little test drive, and the worst thing happened. Our tire is now flat, so I have to deal with this. It never ends. We now have to replace the rear inner tube since it decided to let go basically immediately on the road. Thankfully, taking off the rear wheel is pretty easy. Just remove the cotter pin, the big nut, brake linkage for the rear drum, then slide out the axle, and the wheel is free from its prison. Okay, so the rear wheel is off, and I'm not going to film myself struggling with these tires because I don't want to show how bad I am. But next time you see this tire is going to be off, and I'm going to be putting in the new tube. Tube removed, and minor damage to the crappy paint that was on here before, so I'm just going to repaint that later on. Tube goes on first. Then we can slap the tire over everything, lube it up nicely with some soapy water, and then try and not give myself a pinch flat. Okay, moment of truth. Time to see if I gave myself a pinch flat and I ruined my day. I don't hear any air. I think we're pretty good. Solid. Now we can just slap on the rear wheel, and of course installation is just a reverse of disassembly, and we can finally take this out on its maiden voyage. After weeks of wrenching, tuning, and tracking down stubborn gremlins, the 1972 Honda CL350 Scrambler is finally back on the road, and let me tell you, it was worth every scraped knuckle and late night in the garage. This bike has been sitting for a long time, and it showed. The carburetors were gummed up, ignition was unreliable, and suspension was vintage in the worst way. But now that I brought it back to life, I'm reminded of just how satisfying it is to bring back one of these old machines. Tuning and adjusting the twin carburetors to behave nicely was probably the trickiest part, but now that they're sorted out, the engine revs nicely with most of its original 30 horsepower on tap. With the front forks and rear suspension completely overhauled, what was once a sloppy mess is now tight, relatively composed, and surprisingly comfortable, even by modern standards. So what's it like to ride? In one word, fun. This bike is light, nimble, and full of character. It doesn't have a ton of power by today's standards, but it delivers it in such a smooth, approachable way. Rescuing this old Honda was more than just a mechanical job. It was a chance to reconnect with the simplicity of riding. These old Hondas were built to be ridden and enjoyed, and now this one gets to do just that again. If you're thinking about picking up an old project bike, I can't recommend it enough. It's not always easy, and it won't always go as planned, but when you're finally able to kick it over and hit the road, there's nothing quite like it. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this build and want to see more classic bike rescues, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below to let me know what you'd want to see next.